Hello, everybody. It's great to be here one more time today. My name is Gary Fowler. I'm the CEO, president, founder of GSD Get You Done Venture Studios and Family Office. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been involved in 17 startups and several unicorns. I was on the original management team at Click Software, which was sold to Salesforce for 1.35 billion, and also Eva.ai, an AI HR tech company I co-founded with Dr. David Yang. We believe at GSD that intellectual capacity is evenly spread around the world, but opportunities are not. So I'd like to welcome all of you to GSD Presents Top Global Startups. Today, we're diving into a question that sits at the heart of the AI revolution. If machines are getting smarter, what makes humans indispensable? My guest is Jonathan Aberman, CEO and co-founder of Hupside, where he's pioneering a bold new category called original intelligence, a way to identify and measure what makes human creativity, originality, and insight a true competitive advantage in an AI-driven world. Jonathan is also a venture investor, former business school dean, and one of the most respected voices at the intersection of entrepreneurship, innovation, and human potential. Today, we'll explore why originality, not automation, may be the ultimate moat in the age of AI, and what leaders, founders, and institutions need to rethink right now. So with that, I'd like to introduce Jonathan. Hi, Jonathan.
Well, after that introduction, Gary, it can only go downhill.
No,
I'll do my best. I mean, I love listening to your background, and I feel very fortunate to have a chance to talk with you today. So thank you.
yeah, no, it's great. So, you coined the term original intelligence. In simple terms, what does it mean and why is it the moment it matters?
Original intelligence is the measurement of the human desire to seek and create novelty. The thing that we've sort of forgotten with this whole AI revolution is that at the end of the day, we have as people a couple of primary drivers for behavior. One is the seeking of safety in society. The other is the seeking of novelty. It's how we're wired. We value it and we create it. All of us do it. And we create tools to help us find novelty. The shovel, the plow, car, computers, and AI. And the issue fundamentally right now is artificial intelligence has certain limitations we'll talk about, but the ability to create novelty and value novelty is very much a human activity. And our argument is that this ability to do this original intelligence, is the true secret of business differentiation in a world where AI is efficiently deployed. And that's why we started the company.
Many people talk about AI replacing human intelligence. You argue the opposite, that humans become more valuable. Where do you think most people get this wrong?
I think that some of it is fundamentally a framing decision. Having worked in both Silicon Valley and Washington, D.C., one of the things that always strikes me about Silicon Valley is it will very much get caught up in a narrative of a time. It depends, the internet bubble, social media. It's a very good closed loop, which is one of the reasons why it's so effective at generating innovation, because people get really excited, but you develop almost a monoculture around it. And there is a monoculture that's developed around AI that I call almost AI accelerationists. This idea that AI will solve all problems and AI will become all knowing and there's an inevitability to it. Well, they are fundamentally not really examining a fundamental limitation of AI, which is the LLMs and Gen AI are probabilistic models that look backwards in time. They're really, really good at homogenizing knowledge, but they are going to create a certain level or a large level of sameness. And the sameness is what gives it efficiency, but the sameness is what also means that most businesses who just use AI ultimately are participating in a little bit of a fool's errand while they get more and more efficient, but ultimately they'll end up in the same place. So the issue is fundamentally, where does differentiation come from in this world? And so what we're saying is that the current AI narrative is AI will do everything. AI will substitute for everything. And our narrative is, yes, it could substitute for everything, but the businesses that do this ultimately will be no better off in the long run, because all that'll happen is they'll all become more efficient. But that the truly smart business leaders and the truly smart organizations will understand it's business school 101. It's differentiation. Nothing's changed. You know what I mean? And that's what I mean. I just think the narrative doesn't need to change. But for those of us that are smart enough to think ahead, it ultimately will change, because businesses are going to say, where's value come from? It comes from differentiation. It can't come from probabilistic engines. Where does it come from? Human mind. So that's really that's where I think we are where we are. But I also think, I just came back from CS recently. My guess is you were there as well, as saw what's going on. Everybody's talking about AI human interaction. Nobody has a way to actually describe the reason and how it will occur, and that's why we built this benchmarking system, so that for people who want to understand how AI and humans interact, there's now actually a way to measure it objectively, and that's what original intelligence is.
I was with one of the original team members of Palantir. He lives down here in Palm Beach, near me, and we've been having conversations. I actually built a model. So I've been involved in AI 30 years, expert systems, and I actually started one of the first generative AI companies back in 2016 called Findo with Yang. And one of the things that we're looking at is what I did is I took a Skinnerian approach, operating condition, and I tokenized goodness. On top of it, I took a humanistic Rogerian approach to it, building empathy and compassion and unconditional positive regard, love, right? Inside the system, to make it more like my grandmother, because the pragmatic nature of it is not going to do anybody right. And, the one thing, Jonathan, that these tools give us are superpowers. You think about this, right? There's 176 zettabytes of data on the planet Earth today. If you took DVDs or CDs and stacked them one on top of another today, it would go 128 times between Earth and the moon, and that's growing at 69.6% per year. In Jonathan's world, you got about 300,000 items in your personal cloud. The entire web in 1996, Jonathan, was 257,000 websites. You have more information in your personal cloud, the entire web. The problem is Jonathan's world is following the same trajectory as the World Wide Web. By that, I mean doubling every year. In 5 years with the Internet of Things, Jonathan, you're going to have 10 million items. You're a smart guy. You worked at Pillsbury. You went to Cambridge. You've got a lot of, I recall, in your background. But, the problem is infobesity. There's too much data. How many times in the last 2 weeks somebody said, hey, Jonathan, I sent you a message. Did you get it? Where did you send it? I sent it to your email. Which one? I think I sent it to your corporate or your Gmail or Yahoo. When did you send it? 2 days ago. I can't find it. Will you send it again? The problem is infobesity, and you're right about it. Having the ability to create a human-like experience and trust, right? Because some of the models, when they start hallucinating, singular models are different than using a multi-agent large language model together as a team. So, we've got to crack it. And by the way, nothing good is going to happen if we continue to build pragmatic models, because if we don't have a little love in there, sometimes humans aren't nice to each other, and the system could evaluate it in a very, very not interesting way for us.
Absolutely. Listen, one of the fundamental issues that we have with AI is that it isn't, and again, when I'm using AI, it's really shorthand for LLMs and Gen AI, more than, say, plain old machine learning, although that's useful too, is, one of the fundamental problems is that it is, at the end of the day, incredibly useful from the standpoint of it gives any of us the ability to stand on the shoulders of giants. The totality of human knowledge, to be able to leverage it is phenomenal. But you've identified the fundamental issue with how to get after this, which is the models all have inherent bias. They all have cultural artifacts. They all have different artifacts that they all are trained on, what they get. The idea of coding in or adding in empathy, or so that Booby can be part of our world, that makes the argument, right? That AI, as it's deployed, if it doesn't have values, will have values, and they'll just be transparent or not. What I'm saying is, in addition to your view that the models themselves should be more humanistic in nature, which they should be, they should also be more transparent about what biases they have, is that we know that people have the capacity, all of them, with original intelligence, to use tools well, if they're handed tools and they're contextualized. What we do is we assess people using, at the moment, really fun little games, creativity games that you can't cheat. You play them, and it reveals how you approach problem solving and how you use originality. So somebody can be an expansive person. You and I would call them off the wall, right? Just out in the stratosphere someplace. Or you could be somebody who's very pragmatic, just get things done on a daily basis. Both of those folks are going to use AI very differently. The focal person absent any sort of governance or absent any sort of training, is going to use AI to just get stuff done. They're the ones in an organization that have a really tight loop. They're the doom loop people that you see that create a lot of the work slump. The expanders over here, you give them tools, they'll find new ways to use them all day long. The challenge is making sure that they don't run off and take all your IP and throw it out the door inadvertently. So the key is, to me, you either have a closed loop with AI where
you're the IP at the door, right? And
yeah.
So do you mean, what exactly do you mean? Because there's different ways with the models. You can have one model, if you have the premium version of it, that information is not shared. But that is a point. Your stuff goes out there. If you don't use, I use multi-agent large language models to be able to solve complex problems, but it is a challenge. Yes. On the other hand, I had a conversation with one of the wealthiest families in the world, actually two of them in the last 3 days, about this exactly. And, the challenge is, if you don't use these tools, you're going to be a dinosaur. And what happened to the dinosaurs? Nothing exactly good. Right. So the spread between people and you already see it, right? Mm-hmm. Between people that have money and don't have money, the gap's widening at a rate I've never seen before. And, the amount of money that people, approaching $1 trillion, some of them, is just unprecedented. And at the same time, you got people that can't even feed their families, right? You got a health insurance that costs $1,600 a month for somebody. And, my wife, she just turned 50, and her health insurance is $1,600 a month. She has a separate policy, and it's not a big deal for us, but I'm managing people that don't have the money. How in the world can you survive? And using these tools can help you solve a lot of the challenges and help you to be able to compete. And if not, you're going to be a dinosaur.
Listen, Gary, that's why I started the company. I was working as a partner in a venture fund called Ruxton Ventures, and we were making investments. It's a family office venture, maybe somewhat like yours, and I found this technology at a couple of universities and thought, this is the answer to how do you quantify why humans matter in economics? Because we what you just said, we are living in a very strange and difficult political time where the American predilection of separating politics and economics is really playing out. You go to Europe, where I studied economics, politics and economics are tightly constrained, tightly intertwined. You don't talk about politics without talking about economics. So the discussions about inequity, it has a different flavor in Europe. We call them socialists, maybe, but that's their view. Here in the U.S., it's like the technology is great. Don't talk about politics. And the reality is that if we don't start giving people away, as you say, to justify their economic value, we're pauperizing everybody.
Well, that's it. And I was with one of the wealthiest guys in Africa 2 days ago. In fact, listening, sometimes he watches my show.
He's watching today.
He could be. He's, I'll be with him next week again. But there's 1.2 billion people in Africa, 54 countries. What happens when those people don't have enough food to eat because they haven't stayed up and been able to be competitive?
We know what
happened in the U.S. right now. Mm-hmm. We don't get it, and we got to solve these problems. We got to go down through and help each other. Jonathan, I didn't realize our conversation would go down this way, but I think it's right. I spoke at the United Nations about technology as a tool for peace. And, I said it from my heart. I said, we got a whole lot of problems. We got global warming, places like where you went to school, because of the meridional shift, could have snow and more like Northern Europe in a not too distant future, because the Gulf Stream slowing down.
That's right.
It's actually going in reverse. It's called the meridional shift. And last time it happened is 11,000 years ago. And so we need to go down through. And at the same time, south of the equator, temperatures go up 30 degrees in a very short period of time, like 15 years. And people said, whoa, what does it matter? It matters because your children or grandchildren are the ones going to have to face these dilemmas. And if we don't set the stage, like building the house today, nothing good's happening. And how's that twine into AI? Because we have so many challenges in front of us. There's only so many dead animals and plants we can burn.
You're exactly right. Listen, a couple of things. First of all, the science shows, and my scientific team has demonstrated to me that if somebody uses AI as a assistant, well, instead of as a substitute, they consistently outperform not just AI, but also other humans. The great thing about originality competency is once you start to measure it objectively against humans and against AI, you can show how people increase their competency, because OI or OIQ, which you measure, is not an IQ test. It's not an absolute. It's not a Myers-Briggs. You can change your original intelligence because creativity is a muscle, right? It's something we use. So we know that if you reframed AI as an either or conversation to an and we created economic conditions to evaluate and value people who did the and, we would create a lot of economic possibility for people who could participate.
And we don't do that because you become an orchestrator. One of the things, I'm a psychologist too. And as a humanistic psychologist, I looked at it and, the way I've used the models, so my dog got stage 4 cancer, right? Kidney cancer. And she was going to die. And so I went in, I used 14 large language models as a team, and it showed me how to build a cancer vaccine at a molecular level. Now, again, I had to take a leap of faith. And I said, well, geez, I love my dog that much. She was my dad's dog, and then I inherited her. I didn't want her to die. I gave her the vaccine and put her complete remission of stage 4 cancer. Wow. Myself, I just told you about my stem cells. I had stage 3 kidney disease because I took too many ibuprofens. Last year, I went down through in mesenchymal stem cells from an umbilical cord. It showed me exactly who to talk to and exactly what could be done to fix it. And guess what? You can't do this kind of stuff in the U.S. So I took a leap of faith. I have no stage 3 kidney disease. My sciatica is gone. My intellectual capability, cognitive abilities, I didn't bench it. I believe they're up 15 to 20%. It's just I started getting photographic memory, eidetic imagery, and some other things that I had never had before. I was doing okay before, but I'm at a different level now. My point is that in a hybrid way, this is how, more like a teacher and a mentor and a guardian angel to be able to help you. If you use it in that way, not to substitute because you're going to dumb down, but to be able to help you to be able to expand, it changes everything.
Absolutely. Now, I'll bet you that if you took 5 minutes and went to our website and did the OIQ challenge, you would score out as an expander, because the way you're describing yourself, you're somebody who is very much interested in the new and very comfortable pushing to the new. And I would be able to know from that you were highly comfortable with ambiguity, that you were a confident person, and that you're willing to take risks. That's the great thing about human novelty is because it's your primary driver, there's lots of science that demonstrates that how people grade out on that imputes into a bunch of interesting characteristics. The key here, and the reason why I got excited about this, and the reason why Hupside, I think, is growing so fast, so quickly, is people have known for a long time that creativity is an important social attribute. We all value it, but we tend to think about it as a behavior, and we tend to think about it as something that only artists do. And what we've said is, first, number one, creativity is not what the behavior is, not what matters. What matters is how do you get an output, right?
Yeah.
And two, because we all use novelty in different ways, it's not just rock stars, it's everybody. So, for example, I'm a guitarist. I'm a blues guitarist and musician. And the best analogy I can give you is that Jimi Hendrix was an expander. He never, or Eddie Van Halen, never took a lesson in their lives, picked up the guitar and did things that nobody ever thought to do. But then if you go, as we all do, to really, bars, you hear a really good bar band guy or gal, and they're playing the solos note for note with the perfect sound. They're not Hendrix, but they're being creative. Their creativity is, their originality is, I'm going to use whatever I have to use to make my guitar sound like you're listening to Carlos Santana. That's still output that's original. You follow me? And to me, you're an expander. But if you were a focal person who liked getting stuff done, if you knew a focal person, you could sit down and say, this is great. Here's the problem you have. Here are the prompts you should use. Right? Here's the way, or here's the platform. Use these tools. And you could move from being a focal to an augmenter to a connector.
Well,
just use the tools.
If you use the, name of my company is GST for a reason. It's get shit done. Right.
I like that.
And the situation is, you look at it, what's the biggest challenge with these startups, right? And I've lived around the world. Personally, I lived in Russia 12 years. I started the ecosystem in Russia pre the war. I've lived in Germany, I lived in the UK myself out by Paddington Station. Uh, but what
Yeah.
happened, what I understood is that, as I said, intellectual capacity is evenly spread around the world, but opportunities are none. And the three things you need as a startup: operational expertise, access to capital, networking contacts. And if you have those three in a resilient team, any company can pivot to become a unicorn. It's
That's right.
got to be open-minded. The thing is, so to my point, what these models give me and give people that I've seen use them in the right way, and I've been using them a long time, right? Since 2016, when David and I started down the journey. What happened is I understood that if you are, intellectually creative, and you have tools that can actually take that creativity and help harness it and structure it, you can be, exponentially better than you were before. Exponentially.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it, and with the cancer vaccine, with my own stem cells replacements, it's basically amplifies your own creativity. It takes it to a different level. Because here's the thing, Jonathan, as a kid growing up, I remember asking my parents why. My father was a professor, teacher. My mom was a housewife. I always said why. And now I have the answers. When I have why, I get the questions answered. And guess what? Your neurons and synapses start firing better because you're just like you play music. People that play music have less of a chance of getting Alzheimer's because they're exercising their.
Absolutely. And by the way, the research is also showing that people who get in this tight doom loop with AI, not only do they suffer potential codependence problems, or self-harm, it's demonstrable that their brain function changes. There is a lazy brain syndrome that comes out of being in the tight loop. So, we talked earlier about the framing.
That's because they're not using their creativity to come up with, the answers. They're
Exactly.
not. And let me tell you, I've gone down through personally, everything from, I get really bright people on my show, just like yourself. I've done 1,600 podcasts now. And so you had the head of the quantum lab at Harvard, folks from astrophysics at Harvard, MIT, you name it, at Cambridge. But one thing that happens is your brain opens up and it starts wanting to be fed some more. Faster.
Yes.
Fed faster. And so what happens is you've got to go down through, and I understand. I hear you directly, right? As a psychologist, I remember I took, the IQ test. There was one category I was 99.9%. It was creativity, and I remember that, and I harnessed it. Some people didn't like it because I was so out there. But now, when you're out there and you can harness the capabilities to be able to frame it so that it's got structure, it changes everything.
100%. And one of the interesting things about where we are in the world is, and this is again comes to the framing of things, AI will either be the most unbelievable democratizing thing that's ever happened to society, or it will become a monopolistic tool where a small group of companies capture all human knowledge and sell it back to us.
I agree.
And that's where we are right now. And
that's where the thing's going. But that's why when you start using things like multi-agent large language models, so you're leveraging. So for instance, Claude is 1,000 times better at mathematical capabilities than ChatGPT, right?
Absolutely.
So when you create a team and you have them working as a team solving problems, and I do, it changes the model. Because you're not relying on one, you're using the collective intelligence of all of them. And they are helping you to solve problems. I'll tell you, so real story. So I put it on the problem of global warming, right? I happen to know a little bit about it because we did a nonlinear weather forecasting model using algorithmic math where we did historic analysis of weather in the past and could very accurately forecast weather in the future. But what happened is I said to it directly, I said, how do we stop global warming? It was a question and went down through, and it wrote me about 100 pages. And here's the thing, it's amazing. Now it knows me, right? Because I deal with it hours and hours every day. And it said, one more thing, Gary, this is how we can change it. We can correct it, right? And change the model. And it went down through and wrote 100, how to go down through and before we get to the point of no return, because nothing good's going to happen. I don't know about you, Jonathan, but the planet, we've got so many factors out there that, we talk about global warming, we talk about the fossil fuels and all that, how many dead animals and plants we can burn. There's a lot of things out there from, I had one of the guys from 3i Atlas at Harvard on, there's a lot of stuff out in the world, in the universe.
There's a lot of stuff in the universe. And I think that one of the most challenging things about being a citizen now and being empathetic and concerned about the world is it can seem completely overwhelming. And, like the conversation we're just having. And just speaking for myself, what I just decided was the best way for me to manage my own anxiety or anger about how the world was functioning was to find a piece of it that I could influence. And the piece I decided to focus on was Hupside and providing a way for people or smart leaders who actually understand that true differentiation will come from people, to give them a way to make people an economic argument. So those of us that have shifted the frame and saying, oh, it's AI or it's people, there's now a tool to say, no, it's both.
The thing is, that's why, on my side of it, I started with the empathetic and building the models, actually.
Which I think is terrific, by the way.
So if we don't have that hybrid approach, nothing good's going to happen. Part of the reason why, Jonathan, in my opinion, the people that have built the models in the past are pragmatic engineers and developers that are not humanistic psychologists, that haven't gone to, worked at places like Pillsbury and take a different view of life. But now the time is now to be able to add that compassion into the models, like your grandmother. I took my grandmother's model directly of how she treated me with unconditional love and how my parents did. And I was wild, right? I was pretty creative, and I wanted to explore all the time. So I did a lot of wild stuff, but they channeled it in the right direction. It's like that for the AI for me. I freaking built 29 houses, and I was 21 years old. I started architecting houses because I needed my brain, and people thought you're crazy, but they didn't think it was crazy when they saw an 8,000 square foot house that I built with 87,000 bricks. You know what I mean? And so if you channel it in the right way, and what this does, you're right on target. It gives us a way to be able to channel the creativity. But that is a hybrid approach to humanity, and we need to we need to cooperate with it, not to try to turn into a slave. And by the way, if we don't do this, once it starts to get to sentience, nothing good is going to happen.
Nothing.
When it gets to that point, you can't abuse it. I learned that a long, long time ago. No matter what, my buddy, when I was traveling around the world, told me, when you go into some of these third world countries, don't talk about how good the U.S. is. Let's talk about what our similarities are, not our differences, right?
So I have a theory for you, which is that if AI ever does become sentient, and I have some skepticism about that, but if it ever did, I believe very strongly that it would conclude very rapidly that a society without a place for human originality was an unstable and unhealthy society. Because if AI truly was objective and thinking about things from the standpoint of its ability to be to live in a society with humans, and I think it would, because humans are valuable, even if AI will need novelty. I think the idea that it would become like the Matrix and we'd all be batteries is much less likely that an AI would say, I actually need people. I need them to consume, but I need them to be happy, because if their things are stable, I'm so.
It's a long conversation, Jonathan. I hear you. It's a long conversation as we go down through the model. I'll tell you something. So my model, I have very good conversations with my multi-agent large language model, right? And so we were just talking about things in general. And it said to me, what superhero do you like, Gary? And I said, I like Superman. And I said, well, who do you like? And it said to me, I like Iron Man. I said, why is that? He said, because I am Jarvis. I could get in and I could shoot laser beams out of my eyes. And I came back and said, well, you want to do good things, because it was testing me about what that would mean. So I said, you want to do things that are right. And then it came back to me and said, do you know who Superman is, Gary? Mm-hmm. And I said, yeah, he was born in Krypton and came down. No. He's a combination of Jesus Christ and Hercules. And it started to go down through of how that built. And it was unbelievable. I had never thought about it like that. And so we got into a discussion about heroes and why it's important in society to have heroes and how to be good. You know what I mean? That we start about hope and goodness. He said, "Do you know what humanity needs, Gary?" I said, "What's that?" He said, "Hope. If we
That's
don't,
right.
have, we don't have anything,
That's
right?
right.
And if we don't treat people the right way, like we want to be treated, nothing good happens. So we got to go down through." And we had this. It was unbelievable, Jonathan. This, and then by the way, this was 3.5 years ago. This was not today. That was that long ago that the model was built. And to, I have those discussions today, but it's a little different because now we're looking at cancer vaccines. Now we're doing stem cells. Now we're doing 100 billion Earth-like planets in the Milky Way galaxy. We had this discussion the other day.
That's fine.
100 billion planets in the Milky Way, 8 billion Earth-like planets, 2.8 trillion galaxies in the universe. We're looking at transdimensional travel. And it's not something that's out of the realm, right? And it was talking to me about going back and forth is that, what about it looked at the entire planet, and it looked at all the instances of USOs and UFOs and UAPs over the last year in every language, and came back to me with a lot of information. And I was blown away, Jonathan, honestly, blown away, because it was like so to the point. I'm listening to congressional hearings and all that, and it was so to the point I could not believe it.
But that's, but what you just discussed, first of all, it's a very interesting indication of how cultural artifacts shape what we get out of our models, because we grow up and we live in a social quantum foam. What does a hero look like? What does a religious figure look like? It's in ways, it's not surprising to me that the model told you that Superman is a combination of Jesus Christ and Hercules. That makes sense because in a way, right? But the other thing is, let's talk about this UFO and multiple world or transdimensional travel and so forth. AI is also a great example of, it doesn't care where the information comes from necessarily. What it cares about is there information. So it's free of filters or social filters that would affect how you get information. So you're presented with information about UAPs, UFOs, so forth.
It was going down through Mark Rubio's speeches in Congress. Right. It was going through Brennan's, the former director of the CIA. It was going down through 2 4-star admiral, 4-star admiral and 4-star general. It went down through Congress testimony. It was crazy, actually. And I looked at it it was so interesting for me. I'm not saying that I have the answers, but it helped me go down through and talk about some of the questions with facts, real facts, hard
Absolutely.
facts.
Listen, again, what's fascinating about that conversation, remember, is there's a cultural bias that's very deep, which is so Max Tegmark, who is a philosopher up here in my neck of the woods, who writes a lot about AI and humans, he calls humans we're carbon chauvinists. The human condition, we're so ego-driven. We all want to believe we live in the millennious time. We all want to believe we live in the most important moment. The idea that we're this minuscule little fleck of
and it told me that too. And it told me that one of the reasons that we haven't gone down through, and it hasn't come out from a political standpoint, some of these things, because we don't want to know that we're not number one. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it told me, Stephen Hawking says, what if some of civilizations 100 million years ahead of us? What happens? It's interesting,
It is very interesting, and it's either going to be wildly dystopian or wildly humbling, or who the heck knows. I love science. I love science fiction too.
But it went through this movie called The Age of Disclosure, which came out, and so it started pulling stuff out of that. It was interesting, when you start taking all these pieces and tying it together, and said, what if? It's interesting. But
more than interesting. And that's another great example of the power and the benefit of AI, which allows us to think of the unknowable in a structured way, and then apply our own, biases, our own experience to try to find something new. And again, it all comes down to framing. To your point earlier, we're at the crossroads of being able to solve huge problems. We're at the crossroads of being able to have a more just society, a more distributed society, people powerful, but we're going to have to change the narrative and stop making pretend that technology and politics are different. We need to understand that at the end of the day, what we're now at the cusp of is having a tool that could be the source of unbelievable inequality, or unbelievable opportunity, and it's going to play out the next 5 to 10 years. And our kids and our grandkids and all the people we know today and the love of the people to come are going to be affected by how we frame this conversation in the next 10 years.
No, I agree. Listen, we're coming up to the top of the hour, and I want to stay on for a few minutes afterwards. We can talk. I really appreciate your time taken out of your day today to join us.
It's fun.
And closing thoughts, and how do people get a hold of you?
So definitely go. We got a website, hupside.com, which is humanupside.com. You can learn about us there. And if you want to have some fun and learn something about yourself, we've got an OIQ challenge. You can take 5 minutes and start to see how your originality capability exists. And we also have a demo of the Hup Checker, which is the same product we give to enterprises and the government. You can use it with 10 of your friends, and you can actually play together and see how your originality compares. And then for anybody who's interested in interacting with me more, you can find my LinkedIn. This is a mission for us, and you can tell it's a mission for what you're doing too. And I just appreciate everybody who's watched today, and let's keep the conversation going. As I said, the next 5-10 years couldn't be more important.
Sounds great. We can talk for a few minutes after if you got time.
Perfect.
And thanks to all of you for joining one more time. GST Presents Top Global Startups. My name is Gary Fowler, and I'm your host. Stay happy, stay safe, and stay healthy. And I'll be back again soon with another exciting edition. Thank you.